Waiting for a lull. Good morning, gentlemen. We'll try it again. Good morning, gentlemen. It's good to see everybody. We have a nice crowd here, a big crowd on Zoom. We have a few illegal interlopers on Zoom. I noticed Clark Goodwin and Albert Anderson are joining us today. That's always nice to see. Let's pause for a word of prayer. Good and gracious Heavenly Father, we gather on this beautiful spring day. We thank you for the renewal and the emergence of new life that spring promises. We thank you for this Easter season and the renewal of life that it promises. We thank you for this church and for all the families represented here. Pray you would be with all of us. We thank you for this food and pray you would bless it to the use of our bodies. We thank you for our speaker this morning and for his willingness to share his personal journeys and perspectives. Pray you would be with all of us and help us to do your service in the world. We ask in your name. Amen. Do we have any announcements this morning? Yeah.
Just a quick reminder that in spring and that we have beautiful things growing, including that burned ivy or our proverbial crown of thorns around our lovely trees. So we got a workday session tomorrow morning at 9:30, meeting down in that lower end of the parking lot nearest Howell Mill, if anybody would like to join. And if you do want to join, let me know and we can talk about what tools you may have and what tools we may need to get.
Thank you, Craig. Do we have any visitors here this morning or newcomers? Nobody wants to be identified. Leonard, it's nice to see you again. Good to have you here. You may have heard, and you may not have heard, that Jim Stokes, this is the Jim Stokes from Marietta, not the Jim Stokes that's married to Esther, but Jim Stokes passed away this week. He's been battling a number of health issues, and it's been a sad situation. So send your thoughts and prayers to Shannon Sale and her family. She is Jim's daughter, and to Sally Cole, who is Jim's wife.
One married to Esther, he said.
No, that's right.
I didn't know we had another one.
Yeah, his wife.
Well, I already mentioned that Clark was on. I don't have a report. Thank you, Reynold. So yes, and do you know what time it is? 2 o'clock this afternoon is memorial service here for Ginger and Harry Beverly. It's a combined memorial service. 2 o'clock here this afternoon. Bert Broadfoot is in Las Vegas cashing in the winnings on his NCAA pool bets. And so, but he wanted me to announce that next week's speaker is Richard Waterhouse, who is the executive director of Buckhead Heritage Foundation. So our speaker this morning is Tom Jones, and this is Tom E. Jones of Chamberlain Herdlicka, and not a Tom Jones, the prosecutor extraordinaire. He says, AKA Tom Jones the younger. It's a shame Bert's not here because I would share that Mr. A. Tom Jones actually will be our speaker in a couple of months. And then I would say, you know, it's not unusual to have a Tom Jones speaker. But like I said, Bert would have appreciated that, I think. Tom is here this morning to speak about his recent trip with Eleanor to India and his perspectives. And without anything further, we'll welcome Tom Jones.
Is this working? About that. Can y'all hear me? You know, this is kind of the equivalent of inviting people over back like in the late 50s or early 60s to see the slideshow of your vacation with the old Kodak or whatever brand it was of slide projector. But I'll try to make this interesting. Eleanor and I had a great time in India. We were a little reticent about making the trip. It's a very long trip, 22 hours to get there and get back. And, we had a stop in Paris going over at Charles de Gaulle and finally made it to Delhi and then coming back through Amsterdam. So it's a demanding trip. I'm a big Indian food fan. I really like Indian food, and I like a lot of the restaurants in Atlanta that serve Indian food. But frankly, that was not the high point of the trip. In fact, at a couple of points in the trip, I was laid low by that aspect of our travel. But it's a trip well worth taking, and I'm going to present it to you mainly visually and make a few comments along the way. Start out with a little bit of information on the country of India. It's interesting. Apparently, India was a big hunk of land attached to the old continent of Antarctica, and it broke off at some point and floated north and banged into the main part of Asia and the Himalayan mountains were a result of that. But it seems pretty stable now. Seems to be well attached to the continent. I didn't realize there's such a significant border with China. You'll see in the slide there, and it borders also on Bhutan, Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Myanmar, which is the old Burma. Just to get an idea, I thought it was larger than this. This is a comparison of India landmass to that of the U.S. So you can see that traveling from New Delhi to Calcutta would be kind of like going from Omaha to Nashville, something like that. It's about a third of the size of the continental U.S. This was our itinerary. It's a large country. We couldn't cover everything. So this is kind of the Touristo area of India. And I think if you'll pull itineraries from most travel companies, you'll get something like this. It's an initial proposal for a first-time visitor to the country. So we started, number one, in Delhi. Then we went from there to Ranthambore National Park in search of hoping to see a Bengal tiger or two there. Then on to Agra, which is most well known for the Taj Mahal. Then Jaipur, which was the stomping ground of the Maharaja of Jaipur, and a lot of the Maharaja's activities are still evident there in Jaipur. And then Varanasi was our next stop down the Ganges, about halfway between Delhi and Calcutta, where you see the Hindu rituals carried out on the Ganges River. And then finally, the long line going back to Mumbai, which is a huge city of about 23 million people. But it's an interesting place to end your visit and head home. A few facts on India. May not be aware, but it just became the largest, I say 1.4 million, that should be 1.4 billion people, just edging out China last fall as the largest country by way of population. 7th largest in landmass, 3rd largest economy, but only about 2,000 a year per capita income, third largest in number of billionaires. Religion, I was surprised that the number was as low as it is, 73% only Hindu, 14% Muslim, but yet more mosque than anywhere else in the world, with over 300,000. And a higher than I had expected percentage of Christians, about 5%, and 2% Sikhs. Literacy is, if you look at literacy rates in developed countries, they're north of 95%. India's still at 75, although the younger generations are up there in the 95+ percentage as far as literacy. I was also interested to find out that only about 10% of Indians are fluent in English. I had expected, given the length of the English presence, the British presence there, it would be higher than that. Namaste is the way of greeting. You kind of bow just a little bit. I've got an instructional illustration here that you should all pay very close attention to for the implementation of that greeting. This is kind of the ultimate source of the technique for that. Little history. It's an ancient civilization. It goes back to the kind of on a par with Egypt and Mesopotamia as far as the significance of the early Indus River civilization. In around 1500 BC, the Aryan group came in from the northwest and brought with them their Sanskrit language and their Vedic literature, which is the basis for Hinduism. You've heard of the Bhagavad Gita. That's part of that literature. There's a lot of history, but basically there were indigenous Indian empires and kingdoms that came and went. You had some of them controlling large areas of Indian geography. Some were smaller. The Mauryan Empire in 322 BC is always interesting to me because that's when India came in contact with Alexander the Great, who had fought his way all the way from Macedon and Greece through defeating Persia, finally made it to the Indus River, and they said that he sat down and wept because he had no more worlds to conquer. But his successor was defeated by Chandragupta in 322, and therefore the Greek influence was not as dramatic in India as in some other areas of the Middle East. Ashoka in the 3rd century is important because he converted to Buddhism from Hinduism. He converted to Buddhism, and he was able to convert through his influence a large portion of the country over time. And of course, Buddha was the Buddha was born in India, I guess in northeast India, and we'll see some evidences of that as we go through the trip. The huge Islamic influence beginning in the 12th century, some of the sultans from Afghanistan and Iran were able to establish an empire in India called the Delhi Sultanate. And then later, even more significant, the Mughal emperors, who were descendants of Genghis Khan, came out of Afghanistan and established an empire in India that lasted from the early 1500s until the British gradually took control. And you'll see most of the architectural sites that I'm going to be showing you are from the Mughal area. That's, again, it's a Islamic group of rulers, but who were very tolerant of the local Hindu rulers and worked with them in governing the country. The 18th century, the Mughal Empire declines. The British first, the East India Company, more of a commercial operation. They're in competition with the Portuguese, and they're able to establish control of large swaths of the country. And then after a rebellion by the Indian soldiers in the British Army, the so-called Sepoy Rebellion of 1857, the British basically took over and established what's called the British Raj, or the British rule of India, which lasted almost 100 years from 1857 until independence in 1948. And then in 1947, of course, you had partition, Pakistan, East and West Pakistan separating off from India, and them going their separate ways, with Pakistan being the Muslim country and India being primarily Hindu, but a lot, like I said, a lot of Muslims in India. Arriving in Delhi, we were glad to see a person greeting us at the airport there. We used a touring company called Kensington Tours out of Toronto, which I would recommend to you. They've done several tours for us, and they always show up and they do a good job. They provide guides, and if you need them, drivers and hotel accommodations and so forth. The Delhi airport is a very modern facility. I was impressed. It was much more than I expected. New, very clean, orderly. But then once you get outside the airport, this is a typical scene throughout India of poverty and kind of disorder, I guess you'd say. Here are some children on the street. This was not uncommon to see unsupervised children, under 10 years old in the city, pretty much on their own. We had I felt kind of guilty because we did get first-class treatment. We stayed at the nicest hotels, and you see this really crushing poverty right there in front of you. But that did not deter us from staying at these very pleasant places. We're checking in. They gave us the little dot on our forehead, the bindi or tika for good luck. That's our first hotel. We had some great guides, and it was interesting. We talked to them a good bit about the caste system in India. I think the first three of our guides were all Brahmins, which is the highest caste. They're the priests and the teachers. And then you've got the warrior class, and then you've got the merchant class, and then you kind of drop down to the untouchables. But the one theme that stood out among the Brahmins is they're fairly significantly resentful of something called the reservation system in India, which reserves for the untouchables a certain percentage of the jobs, particularly government jobs. And the Brahmins, there'd be some justice here, I don't know, but they're kind of upset with the fact that they're not able to compete. They don't feel like they can compete for some of those positions. The first site that we saw in Delhi was, and I apologize in advance for my pronunciations, which are probably completely off here, but the Qutub Minar complex goes back to the early Delhi Sultanate. If you remember when the Muslims first made their incursion into India, this was constructed in 1193. It was built kind of as part of or on top of and utilized an old Hindu temple complex. You can see evidence of that here and here. You see an Indian parakeet there. There are a lot of those around. And I just thought I'd take a shot of the local squirrels. They're a little bit, they're kind of a combination chipmunk squirrel type animal. Same complex, the tallest minaret in the world, constructed of brick with a mosque. Nearby in Delhi is Humayun's tomb. We're now into the Mughal area. So we had the Indian rulers up until about 1100. Then we had the Muslims come in with the Delhi Sultanate. And then in the early 1500s, we had the Mughal Empire. Descendants of Genghis Khan, but they'd kind of been civilized themselves in Afghanistan before they made their incursion into India. If you look real closely at the photograph on the left, you'll see a placard there of Prime Minister Modi, and that was ubiquitous in India. He was everywhere, on billboards, in the media and so forth. Very popular leader. He's characterized as a Hindu nationalist, but he's probably 70-75% popularity, and he's got an election coming up in a couple of weeks and is expected to continue in office. But you see, this is the sort of thing that you see. They had a big G20 economic meeting, and he loves to take credit for that. And then all the local politicians like to see their face on the billboard with Modi. You see some examples of that. But that's everywhere in the country. You see that sort of political advertising. Humayun's tomb is kind of a precursor of the Taj Mahal, similar style, but it uses the sandstone exterior instead of the marble that you'll see in the Taj Mahal. But just a beautiful area, and Humayun and many of his relatives are buried there. We then went to the market in Delhi, which is a complete chaotic. I can't duplicate for you just the massive humanity. It's kind of like a Georgia football game. At the end of the game, 80,000 full capacity, and you're trying to get out of the game at the end, but it's that way all the time, 24/7. Plus you add on motorcycles, an equal number of motorcycles with the people, and some of these rickshaws, and you can imagine the chaotic feeling. The market in Delhi, we got some samosas, which were okay. The British presence is not all that evident in Delhi, but you see some monuments. The India Gate that was built in the 20s to commemorate the Indian soldiers that died in World War I. There were 70,000 Indian soldiers that were killed in World War I fighting for the Allies. And then the last thing we did in Delhi was to visit Gandhi's residence where he was assassinated in 1947. And this is the spot of the assassination. So we got in a car and headed from Delhi to Ranthambore National Park. And you see scenes of beauty like this along the way, but you see a lot of this sort of thing. A lot of the small little shops in the smaller towns along the road, fruits and vegetables, that sort of thing. The cows are just kind of left alone to run as they will, kind of strays. Motorcycles everywhere. That's their big mode of transportation. So we got to the lodge. We were roughing it at the lodge. It was tough, but we somehow managed to survive a couple of days at the lodge there at Ranthambore National Park. Lots of wildlife around the lodge, including peacocks, which happens to be the national bird of India. And then entering the park itself, which was the former hunting preserve of the Maharaja of Jaipur. It's an incredibly beautiful location, lots of wildlife. This is the banyan tree, the national tree of India. But it's really breathtaking in terms of the beauty that you see in the park. Crocodile. The Maharaja's palace and fort on top of the hill, built in the 17th century, is looking down on you as you make your tour through the park. Seen a lot of wildlife. Can you tell me what's missing from my list of wildlife so far? Okay. So a lot of people go to this place and pay a bunch of money and never see a tiger. But the first day, we did not see a tiger. We actually saw one in an extreme distance and were disappointed. But the second day, we came around the corner and looked up the hill, and there was our tiger. It was almost like a performance because the tiger was obviously aware of our presence. All the observers, and then we got a really good look at one there right at the end of our tour. From Ranthambore, we traveled to Agra, and these are some scenes along the way. Not unusual to see the herds of goats or other animals. This is a dung production operation, which I think they use primarily for fuel. Transportation, you see people co-opting frequently. It's not unusual to see 8 or 10 people in the back of a vehicle, or in this case, 4 people on a motorcycle. A lot of mangoes. There's an abundance of mangoes in India. It's the national fruit, and you see people selling those. Then we're entering Agra, and this is a scene you just see a lot of. This is kind of a typical suburban or urban scene in India. Got to our hotel in Agra. We had a view out our window of the Taj Mahal, but unfortunately there was a cell tower and blocking our view a little bit, but still a nice view. The next morning we got up early, which I'd recommend to do when you go to the Taj Mahal to avoid the crowds. We didn't have much in the way of crowds. Our guide there, and this is the entry point. If you look at the central opening there, you can see the Taj Mahal, and it's very well set up in terms of approaching this just absolutely otherworldly scene that you're about to enjoy of the Taj Mahal. You can see all the pictures that you may see, but you'll never be prepared just for the otherworldly is the only word I can think of, scene that lays before you. It was built by one of the Mughal emperors between 1631 and 1648. Shah Jahan on the left, and it was built for his second wife, Mumtaz Mahal, pictured there. A couple of other views. You can go behind the Taj Mahal across the river and get a different view. And here you see there are 2 other structures. There's a mosque and a guest house on the property as well. Also in Agra, there's the Agra Fort, another Mughal Empire site. Most of these sites are UNESCO World Heritage sites. I'm not going to mention every one that is a UNESCO site because almost all of them are on the list. This is the Agra Fort. The mainly women there doing laundry on the river, just downriver from the Taj Mahal, and they do their laundry and then they lay the laundry out on the shore of the river. Also in Agra is what they call the Baby Mahal, and it was kind of a pattern or draft of the Taj Mahal, built in 1622. We were kind of wandering around there, and this group approached us and asked Eleanor if she could please borrow her hat and her dark glasses. She was so impressed by that. So the girl on the right is wearing my wife's hat and dark glasses, and we took their picture. And the Fatehpur Sikri, that's about 30 miles out of Agra, kind of on the way to our next stop in Jaipur, is also another UNESCO World Heritage Site, very impressive seat of one of the Mughal emperors. From Agra to Jaipur, we saw the Hindu temple. There seem to be a lot of new Hindu temples under construction. Some of them are controversial. One recently, I think, was built on the site of an old mosque that had been desecrated. So there's a lot of political implications to those activities. Coming into Jaipur, our hotel there was very nice. Actually, was formerly the home of one of the kind of collateral lines of the Maharaja clan there in Jaipur. It was the Maharaja of Jaipur that had the palace and fort in the national park that I showed you. But this is our hotel, and these are pictures of the relatives. It's not the direct line of Maharajas, but some of the relatives on the hotel. Jaipur Palace, 1799, work of the Maharaja. A money changer on the street, apparently does a very good business according to our guides. And a lot of fabric sales, particularly for weddings. Weddings are very big in India. People borrow money and spend most of their life savings to put on weddings over there, kind of like we do here. More scenes in Jaipur. This was, had mixed emotions. This guy, you know how the guides take you to these places to do a demonstration of a rug or, you know, jewelry, just to look, you know, not that you would ever buy anything. This guy did get possession of my American Express card. I'll just leave it at that. You can figure that one out. But Eleanor has a fairly nice ring from Jaipur and the prices are very good and reasonable. And I think he was relatively honest as they go, as jewelry dealers go. Probably the most impressive sight in Jaipur was the Amber Fort. This was not Mughal Empire fort, but one of the Maharajas constructed this fort in 1592, and pictured there. Inside the fort, beautiful views, very defensible position. You can see the wall at the top of the crest of that hill, and so it was serious military function for the Amber Fort. The Sheesh Mahal is famous. It's just a beautiful palace of glass inside the fort. And there's another scene inside the fort, the gardens. And on the way back to town, the water palace in a lake there again in Jaipur. Lastly, in Jaipur, there's an astronomical site where one of the Maharajas decided, working with some of his court scientists, to develop a whole series of astronomical instruments for figuring out when eclipses were coming, to tracing the path of planets and that sort of thing. But there are 19 astronomical instruments in the park, and it's kind of fun to think about that. That's in the 18th century, so they were pretty advanced. Our next stop was Varanasi, and it's a holy city for the Hindus, and as you'll see in a minute, also for the Buddhists coming in to town. Another very chaotic sort of environment. I've got a video of this that I wanted to show you just to kind of give you the feel of the kind of how claustrophobic you feel in this setting. But this is the town. There's Gloria Calhoun might be able to do something with their wiring system, Scott. I'm not sure, but that's not unusual to see that sort of thing. The Ganges River, again, Varanasi is about halfway down the Ganges River between Delhi and Calcutta. And the big deal at Varanasi are, I guess, the Ghats. I guess that's the proper pronunciation, but it's primarily where they have the cremations. People bring their loved ones' bodies and they cremate them there on the side of the river, and they dispose of the remains there in the river. There you see some cremation activity. And at night they have a production. It's kind of like a rock concert, really, but it's three Hindu priests, young Hindu priests, who put on a performance there on the side of the river. A lot of the people are sitting in their boats observing it, but crowds also come from all around India. I'd say it's primarily Indian, but there's some tourists there as well. But it's chanting and singing and smoke, and it's a very entertaining event. Not that old a tradition, something that's been more recent and somewhat targeted toward the tourism trade, both the Indian and the international tourism trade. There you see one of the young Hindu priests involved in that. Hindu temples, I thought we would see a lot of Hindu temples. Most of them are very small, and this is an example of one here. They're numerous but small. They're not typically not significant architectural examples. Here's one exception to that, which is the Hindu temple at Banaras Hindu University, built in 1931. It's a big edifice, and we toured that because our guide had been a student here at the Banaras Hindu University. He was kind of an interesting guy. He's a tour guide, but he's also an investment advisor. And he told me he had about $1 million under management. So he's making about $10,000 a year, probably a little bit more than Bill Fowler's making now. But that supplements his income nicely. And he was, you know, there's a young crowd in India that's on the make. They're coming. They're educated. They're energetic, and I was glad to hear his story. Just I think last week in our paper there was an article that you never would have seen some years ago, where the state of Georgia aims to attract more Indian business. I mean, when you think about that's a development that never would have found its way into the paper 20 years ago or 30 years ago, because the connection didn't exist. As I said, there's also a Buddhist tradition in Varanasi, because the Buddha gave his first sermon after his enlightenment. It's the story there in Varanasi. So there's a Buddhist temple that we visited that has murals showing the history of the Buddha, and then a park, an archaeological park showing the community of Buddhists that existed back in the 500, 400 BC era. A lot of pilgrims from all over South Asia come there. And there's a stupa that apparently sits on the spot where he gave the sermon, because they don't want any disturbance of that area. So they build this big brick edifice and put it on top of where he gave his sermon. That night we went back to the Ganges, and there was a cremation ceremony, and you can see the man in white is the son of the deceased, who was mourning his father and dealing with the whole process. You see a lot of effort on the part of the Indians to reestablish their own history, in the sense of, I think it's largely a function of the British being so dominant for so long. The Indians want to reestablish their own independent source of their history. This is a statue of the Queen of Jhansi, who was involved against the British in the 1857 rebellion. You just see a lot of examples of that throughout the areas where we visited. It was interesting that the city of Varanasi was as safe as it was. We could walk at night. We felt completely safe. And of course, encountered the ever-present cow there as we were walking around the city that evening. Our last stop was Mumbai, formerly Bombay. Big city, 7 islands, 23 million people. Really wasn't much of anything until the East India Company came in and began using it as a headquarters, and from there it kind of took off and has grown and grown. This building here is actually a single-family residence, purported to be one of the largest single-family residences in the world. This guy, Mukesh Ambani, with a net worth of 116 billion, had to carve off about 2 billion of that to construct his home there in Mumbai. Gandhi has a residence in Mumbai that we visited. He's not that much in favor. I think he's in present-day India. I think the national party, the nationalist Modi party, is a little more, has a philosophy that's not quite the pacifist philosophy that was espoused by Gandhi. So you would think I would have thought he was more popular, and maybe it was just a small selection of opinion that we saw. But I didn't feel like Gandhi had the level of popularity that I expected. There's a whole series of these in the house that show Gandhi's history. very interesting. They took us, and I don't know whether this is just American tourists, but they took us to the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. If you remember the Hare Krishnas, they were very active back in the, I guess, the 60s and 70s. The movement was actually founded in New York City in 1966. I didn't realize that. So I felt a little, I don't know, I didn't necessarily want to make that stop, but it was interesting to see, and it's got 10 million followers worldwide now. I didn't realize there were that many, and it's a monotheistic form of Hinduism where Krishna is kind of the guy, and so in a country of 1.4 billion, 10 million isn't that many, but they're still around. The world's largest laundry there in Mumbai. It's incredible. This can't illustrate the size of this thing, but it just goes on and on. And this is really a functioning, commercially successful, apparently, enterprise that takes laundry from the hotels and other operations and turns it around. You see a lot of this. This is architecture that probably in its day was pretty pristine and presentable, but a lot of deteriorating architecture in Mumbai. You see the transition from the British culture to what I've described as the Indian nationalist culture. The old Victoria Terminal, beautiful old Victorian train station of 1887, is now the Chhatrapati Shivaji Terminal, a 17th century Indian warrior. So it's a natural process, and you're not surprised to see that, but you can barely see this, but cricket is still a big sport in India, the most popular sport in India, notwithstanding some of the feelings about the British. For the most part, the guides that we talk to are not big fans of the British, and you can kind of understand that. The Gateway to India commemorates George V of England visit to India. That was the first visit by a British monarch to India. He was not only King of England, but also Emperor of India at the same time. There's another shot. This is an incredible museum. If you go to Mumbai, make sure you visit this. It was the Prince of Wales Museum, named after George V, the same one that the terminal's named after, but while he was Prince of Wales. And now it's named after the same Indian warrior king, Chhatrapati Shivaji. But miraculously, the prince is still standing on the grounds there and has not been toppled. The Indians are very peaceful people. I mean, you didn't get any feeling that there was a lot of violence going on in the society, and I'm sure there are exceptions to that, but that's just kind of the feeling that I got. This is the grounds of the museum, and an incredible collection, mainly of Hindu sculpture, but a high quality museum presentation. So after all those journeys and thinking about what I'd seen, and when I went to India, I thought I want to learn something from somebody that's really got the meaning of life figured out. I mean, I need to find that guru. I need to find that wisdom. I mean, I've traveled all this way, and I've got to do that. So finally, on the last day, we located that person, and I'll tell you later what the meaning of life is, but you'll appreciate. I'll be happy to take any questions. That's probably the extent of my knowledge of this subject, but.
What's the primary spoken language and written language that's used?
Good question.
What is the primary spoken and written language?
The Hindi is the answer, and most of what you see is in Hindi. There's some English, but it's predominantly Hindi, and most of the people are speaking Hindi. That's I think it's a outgrowth of the Sanskrit that the Aryans brought in, and the development of that language over time. Bill.
Tom, what was the air quality like, or the smells that you had on the streets? And, you know, we hear oftentimes it's an environmental disaster country. Did you see any of that?
The place that it kind of hits you in the face is Mumbai, and I'm not sure whether that's the location on the coast or what, but when you first drive into Mumbai, it's the visibility is very low, kind of like you'd think of LA in a smog situation. Environmentally, we asked the guides, why is there so much trash and garbage everywhere? And they said people used to be able to throw a banana peel out and know that it would just rot and go away. And now that there's plastic, they haven't changed their habits. They still do the same thing. And it's you get used to it, and people, it doesn't bother people. It's kind of like, I mean, when I was a kid in Georgia, you'd be driving down the road and throw your wrappers out the window. But things have changed because of societal pressure. That hasn't happened in India. Girls.
Tom, can you go back and show that,
Sure. You sure you don't want to look at Ned for a while here?
You want to see that last slide?
I had permission from the guru for that. There it is. There it is.
Our guide, when we drove by that, he said, "Do you know what that is?" And we all thought it was a palace. You know, we wondered why it was out in the middle of that lake. He said, "No, it is a duck line." Built by Maharaja. It was a duck line.
Well, it has been a hotel type facility, I think, or a lodge, but yeah.
Tom, you mentioned the caste system, and how is the lower class treated politically?
I think politically, I gather that, people are allowed to vote and not discouraged. We saw some people in the market in Delhi. I didn't take pictures of them, but just like out of what you'd expect to see out of a Victorian novel. Just there was a guy that his legs and his feet were behind his head, and he was walking on his hands. I mean, I just felt, and it was just amazing. And you see poor, lots of poor people begging, but not overwhelming. But I think, it's probably much more socialist politically than we are here. But I think they make an attempt to have a democracy of sorts. They're supposed to be the second largest English parliamentary democracy in the world. But there's just still, with $2,000 a year per capita income, you see the poverty everywhere.
Not a lot of social mobility between castes at all. Is that birth?
I think that's dying, but it's going to take a long time. I mean, like I was saying, the Brahmins that we talked to, who were our guides, 3 of our guides were Brahmins. They were not happy with the advantages that they felt like the lower classes were getting in terms of mobility. Yeah. So, yes, Guru.
In the street scenes, we saw a lot of people. It's important to remember that India is a third the size of the United States with 4 times the people. So it's
Almost 5 times.
People and people and people and people.
Yeah. You can't recreate. I mean, the feeling that you get when you walk out in the streets. I mean, people drive recklessly, but they don't have wrecks. I mean, it just seems like, how can this happen? They're coming up behind each other. The motorcycles are, you know, when you get out in the streets, you're walking along, the motorcycles are zipping by you. You know, you feel at risk, but then at the end of the day, you get by.
When we were there,
Feeling, I mean, the crowd, the kind of.
when we were there, our vehicle went around the corner, and here's a guy on the corner sitting down being shaved by a barber
No, there was
on
dentist.
the street.
A dentist in the market, you know, just like right there, you know, just sitting there doing his dental, whatever he did. Yeah, it's fun. I mean, it's fun, but it's crazy.
Clark Goodwin wanted to know how many people were on your group. He sent a chat. So
Okay, Eleanor and me,
just the two of you.
George.
Tom, in your travels, sorry for my hoarseness, was there any discussion of the Dalai Lama? I know he was born in Tibet, but he's lived in India for like 65 years, and he's probably close to 90 years old now. And I think there's a big issue about who will follow him when he passes. And I know it's mainly having to do with the Tibetan Buddhists, but Buddhism in general, I think, looks to the Dalai Lama as a real spiritual leader.
Yeah. The short answer is no, but I was surprised. Buddhism is only like 1% of India now, which is, I mean, it used to be under Ashoka back in the time of Buddha, or shortly after the time of Buddha. It was a very significant component, because Buddhism, unlike Hinduism, appealed more to the common person. It was more of a leveling, egalitarian sort of religion than Hinduism, with a strict, you know, social structure. So, but it's, you know, for whatever process, it's pretty much died out in India, but it spread from there, you know, through East Asia.
Oh, when we were in India, we were in a train station going from one city to another. Tim will probably remember this. And when the train came in, there were as many people on the top of the train as there were inside the train. Did y'all see that?
We did not. They must have cleaned up that particular act. That we did not see that.
Lots of beggars, and I know that Tim, they came up to Tim, and Tim said, no, I've already given it the office.
It's, you know, I feel like we didn't see, I mean, I know we didn't see all of India, and I feel like there are other aspects of the country that we missed just going to the tourist spots. You know, the South, the whole South of India is a different culture, and I'm sure there are probably more Hindu architectural elements there. Hey, Tim.
There you go.
Did you fly out of Mumbai?
We did.
Did you have any trouble in the airport?
No. What happened to you?
Well, Reynolds and I actually got thrown out of the cab when we got there. The cab would not stop moving. We had to jump off well, to get to the airport. It is millions of people.
The Mumbai airport, as I recall, is pretty new, and they're spending a lot of money on infrastructure in India, roads and airports and things like that. Modi is a pretty savvy politician, and he's spending money. Anything else? All right. Thank you. It was a good trip. Thank you. Well, it's easy to take them now with the. Good. Okay.
So I saw that guru. I could just walk there and pull them out. They're all locked up. So all right. Yeah.
But anyhow, I just wanted you to know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you get any reaction from the neighbors? I did yours.
Four years.